This is work I'm doing with Salome, Viljoen, and Jake Goldenfein as postdocs at Cornell Tech. And our paper looks at how mechanism design has sort of drifted from its origins in economic theory into new areas and applications at the intersections of computer science, data science, management science, and behavioral science, a cluster we might call computational sciences of control and optimization. And we look particularly at how these applied sciences mobilize mechanism design in the building and governance of digital platforms like automated online advertising systems and the multi-sided market platforms used in a variety of on-demand apps for things like couriers and ride hailing and so on. So we try to get at the implications of this drift from economics into this cluster of computational control sciences. And specifically, we were trying to ask what happens design's motivations, its normative purposes and justifications, and the dynamics of power as these tools for policy making and social world building become incorporated into different disciplines and different practical environments. In short, we're trying to ask, do we need a critical reappraisal of the legitimacy of algorithmic mechanism design? I'm sure this audience doesn't need an introduction to mechanism design, but I'm just going to briefly sort of tell you where we're coming from. Our jumping off point is sort of the development of mechanism design in social choice theory and welfare economics. And unlike most of economic theory, mechanism design puts the economist as an institutional engineer, selecting an outcome or a desired allocation and then sort of solving backward to arrange a set of rules or conditions that are expected to produce that outcome. And a key idea for our purpose is that the crucial motivation and justification for mechanism design here is that it harnesses the rational behavior of individual actors to produce a desirable social outcome. So in a sense, it's about staging encounters among these individuals so that their discrete choices collectively optimize some prescribed value. And importantly, it's usually assumed that the designer lacks the information about individuals' preferences that would allow for an allocation to be simply dictated in advance. So the mechanisms are there to help surface that private information. The idea basically is to implement incentives and constraints that induce self-interested agents to express their true preferences and align their individual strategies and actions to the optimal outcome. I don't need to tell you all that these ideas and tools have been hugely influential in economics and public policy. And of course, they've been applied quite ingeniously in many really important allocative and decision support systems. We also think that there are some major applications of mechanism design in computational algorithmic settings that raise serious concerns and in some cases fail to honor what we think are important theoretical and practical assumptions that have justified mechanism design as a means for orchestrating social choice and resource distribution. So in the paper, as I say, we focus particularly on online advertising and multi-sided platforms, which are systems that bring many millions and billions of people really into daily contact with algorithmic mechanism design. But in these venues, we often see conditions that don't really comport with what we would expect of traditional mechanism design, such as concentrated market power, massive data collection combined with inferential and predictive techniques from data science, and automated iterative experimentation and adaptation. Whereas in classical economics, you might, for instance, look at single item auctions. Computational auctions are occurring billions of times a day with the same or similar constellations of participants exchanging what are technically unique, but in many cases, practically substitutable products. And so this affords a designer opportunities to constantly adjust mechanisms and to rapidly reiterate the mechanism to be responsive to what the designer can learn about actors' preferences, valuations, and strategies. Both programmatic advertising, which involves automation, machine learning, and auction mechanisms, and the on-demand apps you're probably familiar with, illustrate how online platforms use mechanism design selectively to formalize and implement optimization strategies that leverage these informational, calculative, and power asymmetries. So digital platforms have inflected the techniques of mechanism design through new realms of data science that enable large-scale testing and unequal access to agents' private information through pervasive surveillance. So in these contexts, mechanism design has become fundamental to processes that infer user preferences from behaviors or associations within a network. So rather than accepting the assumption that the agents acting in a system possess private information inaccessible to the designers, those designers in some cases can leverage modular digital platforms to generate and exploit information asymmetries. So for example, a designer might sacrifice, say, revenue maximization in the short term in order to obtain data that will help them capture more surplus over time. So in this case, inferability becomes a new optimization target, and mechanism becomes like a tool of profiling. So we argue that algorithmic mechanism design is thus not always committed to achieving the truthful mechanisms or putting autonomous human rationality to work for a collectively beneficial purpose. Computational mechanism designers may have little interest in some cases in the quality of rationality displayed by agents, and far more important may be the correlations between agent actions, types, and mechanisms. So the agents here are operationalized in these systems in ways that are different from the game theoretical rational agents of traditional mechanism design. And instead, what's of interest is an empirical relation between model, action, and type, a sort of black box linking of informational inputs and behavioral outputs in a way that aligns more closely with cybernetic forms of optimization enacted through reiterative convergence. And we think mechanisms digital drift here exposes a contradiction at the ideological heart of these tools. Mechanism design is an instrument for social engineering premised on autonomous actors making rational choices in a market environment. Yet especially when deployed in these digital contexts and with data science, it often undermines the idea of individual or user autonomy as the bedrock of social coordination. And instead, human rationality becomes a variable to be tuned in exploring for desirable patterns of action and rewards. So in these platform spaces where the data scientific or cybernetic notions of rationality are put to work in the world, whatever fundamental normative account that privileged mechanism design over other forms of social allocation and cooperative decision-making may lose traction. Somewhere in this slippage out of economics and into computational control sciences, the deployment of mechanism design to achieve social choice has been marginalized in favor of using mechanism design to achieve the self-interested ends of the planner, and the tools for doing so have made human rationality into a variable rather than something to be harnessed towards collective benefits. And so to wrap up, we see mechanism design as a normative tool for designing and building our world. Mechanism designers are engineers and world builders, and there are implicit normative theories underlying all of these mechanism designs, and mechanism design becomes normative in its deployment to build economic institutions and tools. However, where we may have once been able to distinguish behavioral optimization through data science as something that we have worried about for undermining autonomy in order to achieve the system's goal or teleology, differentiating that from optimization through mechanism design as a way to harness rational decision-making of a group or social choice to produce an outcome pre-selected by the planner. In digital platforms, these distinctions often recede from view. And instead, when we understand mechanism design in action and the way in which it eats its own assumptions when moving across historical and disciplinary boundaries, this offers us a new story about the topography of optimization, as well as how market rationality is a contingent and constructed notion that defines us as economic and social actors. And that's it. Happy to take your questions. I should say that of the group, I'm probably the least qualified to speak to an audience of specialists in mechanism design, but I'll do my best to represent my comrades.